All right, what's good, everybody? Glad you're here. Sorry I'm a little late. I was having some technical difficulties, but I got them worked out and I'm here, and we're going to have a good broadcast tonight. It's going to be good stuff. Got some awesome things to talk about. Um, Now, before I get into anything, please like, please share, and please subscribe to this video. Um, that helps me a lot, helps me out with the algorithms. And if you're not already subscribed, you should be subscribed. You should subscribe right now. That way you'll be notified whenever I go live or whenever I upload another video. So also, if you want to support my work, sign up for my locals.com community. It's a freshperspective.locals.com, only $5 per month, and you get access to premium content. And also, if you want to do a one-time donation, you can, the links are in the show notes, where you can just check them out. I guess they're not going to pop up. There we go. All right. And also, you can do a super chat during the live stream. If there's any burning questions you want to ask me, just hit that super chat button. That helps me a lot too. I always appreciate those things. Also, excuse me, throat's a little jacked up. But also, we just want to remind you that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com. Conservative news where truth matters. Also, just a couple of announcements. Want to remind you about the Solutionary Summit. It's coming up in just about 3 weeks. It's going to be awesome. September 3rd through the 5th. That's an event that's being put on by Maj Touré and Black Lives Matter and some other folks. And there's going to be a lot of people there speaking. I'm one of them. I will be on one of the panels. But there's a slew of people who are going to be showing up. Dr. Boyce Watkins, Amazing Lucas, and some other folks. So looking forward to that. The link is in the show notes. So if you want to get your tickets, get them now. And also, tonight, I am going to be on the Tammy Mack show, Tammy Mack late night show. I'm going to be filling in for one of her co-hosts, which will be awesome. It'll be something a little bit different for me. I've been on Fox Soul and her show plenty of times, but this will be my first time acting as a co-host. So definitely check that out. It's going to clock Eastern Standard Time. So if you just go to Fox Soul and you go to the Tammy Mack show, and that's where it'll be. So I think that it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. Usually when I'm on the show, there's only one topic and we kind of just go back and forth. But now it's going to be several different of the day. So yeah, I like my hair too. I appreciate that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. The first thing I want to talk about is China. And I want to say that I've talked about this before on my live streams, but there's a new development and new information. And I haven't quite gone down the rabbit hole yet, but I plan to do it this weekend because this is some very interesting and disturbing stuff. Okay. Now, a lot of times when we talk about China, we talk about how they're, sending spies to get into our universities and into our programs where they can learn things and then profit from them. And that always goes to benefit the Chinese Communist Party. So that's one thing that China's doing. They're also buying up land here, buying up parts of our infrastructure. Now, some states like Texas, where I live, and Florida, to prevent those types of things from happening. But it doesn't seem like a lot of states are really acting to curb the Chinese influence in the United States. But there's also another aspect of our continued rivalry with China and their attempts to essentially disrupt us and to decrease our dominance on the world stage. They've also tried influencing our elections to a certain extent. But what a lot of people overlook is what they're doing with our mainstream media, and also how American media is peddle the CCP's propaganda. It's a scary thing. And there's a story that came out recently about Slate. And now, if you're not familiar with Slate magazine, it's also a website. and it is a very far left publication. I mean, they also have a podcast too. I used to listen to it. I haven't listened to it in a while, but Slate is very much on the left. I don't tend to go to them for sourcing material because they do tend to lie, just like a lot of the far left media outlets do. I'll go to other outlets like CNN or MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, all that jazz. But Slate's one that I generally don't go to unless I'm going to debunk something that they're saying. But it appears that Slate magazine is one of several media outlets that has climbed into bed with the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm only exaggerating by a little bit. This is an actual relationship, and Slate's not the only one, and I'll go over that in a second. But a recent report that came out by a publication called The National Pulse, and it revealed that members of the organization's leadership over the past years, or past few years, or past decade, really, have been taking trips to China on the Chinese government's dime. So they're essentially the Chinese government is trying to woo journalists, and Slate's and journalists working with Slate happen to be some of the ones that they're going after. And they're paying for them to come out and go to China and see the sights and, have a lot of fun. I'm sure they've been full of drinks, and basically they're doing a little bit of bribery. And in exchange, these journalists will provide, quote, favorable coverage for the Chinese government and, the nation of China in general. So again, they are paying for these trips. They're paying for all the tourist stuff that they get to do, all the fun stuff. They have a good time over there, again, on the Chinese government's dime. And the article that I'm referring to, it outlines how deep the collusion goes. I don't think I put it in the show notes yet. I got to remember to do that after the show, because you're going to want to read that. But it, like I said, it details the collusion between Slate and the Chinese Communist Party. So the reporter that wrote this, her name is Natalie Winters, and she reported, quote, through Foreign Agent Registration Act filings, the National Pulse has exposed how CUSEF, okay, well, let me back up. This is being done through the China-United States Exchange Foundation. It's called the China-United States Exchange Foundation. This is a group that is linked to the Chinese Communist Party. I'm going to get to them in just a second. But she says the National Pulse has exposed how the China-United States Exchange Foundation sponsoring private dinners and trips to China for mainstream media journalists in exchange for, quote, favorable coverage. Documents also reveal that the China-United States Exchange Foundation has retained Western lobbyists to aid in their quest to, quote, effectively disseminate positive messages to the media, key influencers, and opinion leaders, and also the general public regarding the Chinese Communist Party. Now, she continues. The May 2012 Slate visit include visits with Chinese Communist Party officials, state-run media, state-run universities, and military collaborators such as Huawei. That's been in the news. Now, what is the China-United Exchange Foundation? This is a group that was founded in 2008, ostensibly to foster dialogue between the American and Chinese people. So supposedly this group just exists to kind of, strengthen relations, strengthen dialogue, have conversations between Americans and the Chinese so that we can better understand one another ostensibly. However, the group has been accused on multiple occasions, including by our own government, of being nothing of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front initiative. Now, China's United Front initiative it's almost like a propaganda campaign designed to promote the Chinese Communist Party's international influence and propaganda efforts. So the United Front, China has this campaign called the United Front, and again, it's designed to expand its influence all over the world. The Chinese the China American Exchange Foundation is believed to be a part of that initiative, focusing primarily on the United States. So the group sponsors trips to China for journalists, students, politicians, and other important individuals. So this isn't just reporters who they're focusing on. The group also donates to universities and think tanks in the United States. So this is how far this organization goes to spread its propaganda in the United States, designed to give the American people a favorable view of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. The group engages in these activities to promote positive perspectives towards the Chinese government. And basically what they do is they wine and dine people who are important in positions of leadership. And by doing that, they get these people to come back home to the United States and talk about how wonderful China is. And again, this isn't just as at the journalistic level. These are students, people who are future leaders, and politicians as well. So much of the article that I read, it focused on Jacob Weisberg. He is a former editor of the magazine, and I want to say he's one of the co-founders of the magazine. I'm not quite sure about that, but he definitely was in a primary position of leadership. And it focuses on his visits and his meetings with key members of the Chinese Communist Party. And what's funny about this is that they don't really try to hide it all that well. It referred to tweets that he posted that are still up, by the way. He didn't delete them. In one of his tweets he wrote, "Our nice minder wants to clarify that the plant's best workers are Communist Party members." Now, what he's referring to, he was taking a tour of a factory of a Chinese company. And they had a minder with them, I guess like a tour guide, who kind of let them know how the company works and showed them how things are. And this tour guide wanted to make it known, and they wanted Weisberg to make it known, that the plant's best workers are members of the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, Weisberg went and made sure that he shared it with his Twitter audience. In another tweet, he wrote, "Raw scan of Huawei, the best corporate PR I'd ever heard. I'd invest, but you can't. It's employee owned." And he has a slew of tweets to this effect. He's also written articles that are designed to cast China in a positive light, as do a lot of several other Slate employees as well, who also went on these trips over the past decade. Now, some of them are a little bit more subtle with it, but in others, not so much. So Weisberg had written a piece in which he was seeming to compliment the Chinese regime for, quote, slowly opening up to receiving more criticism from its citizens. You know, get that. You know China, right? You know how China works. You don't just criticize the government. So he wrote a piece intended to persuade Slate's audience to believe that the government is starting to be more open to getting criticism. So here's what he wrote. He wrote, quote, "When I visited China in early 2008, the overall conversation was far more constrained. You had to develop a feeling of trust with someone before he or she would criticize the government, especially in any kind of public setting." Then he continues and he talks about his visit in 2012. And he says that during that visit, quote, "an entire class of journalism students at Peking University shared their objections to the blocking of websites, and their professors seconded the sentiment." So he's basically writing this to give the audience the impression that maybe the CCP is getting a little bit less totalitarian. Again, I mean, if you know anything about these regimes, whether it's North Korea, China, or what have you, you know that they'll put on a show, right? They'll put on a show, especially for journalists, to make it seem as if things are hunky-dory. Just like if a journalist goes to Cuba, they have to have somebody with them. Same with North Korea. They have somebody with them to guide them, and they don't take them to the bad parts. They take them to the good parts to make it sound like, oh, things are great. While you've got people dying of hunger, 5 blocks away or whatever the distance is. Now, several other Slate writers, according to the National Post, they've also participated in these trips put on by the China American Exchange Foundation. And each have written these articles, and I did read them. And again, they're not all of them are blatant, China is great. It's more subtle than that. It comes off just as a report on its on its economy or other aspects of Chinese society. And some of them aren't really complimentary at all. They're just regular reports. But as if this wasn't bad enough, Slate is not the only journalistic outlet whose reporters have been going on these trips, again, being wined and dined. The Post also noted in a different article, and the list of outlets was pretty long. Actually, I kind of want to bring that up and see if I can just read the whole thing to you, because it's going to rock your world. Give me just 1 second. I'm just going to do this. I only had a few listed, but I want to do the whole thing, because why the hell not? Trips. Bear with me just a second. Okay, almost there. Almost there. I'm telling you, you are not going to be happy. Let's see. I think. Oh, stop it. I said stop it. Okay, good. Sorry, there was a pop-up that was coming up. Oh, yeah, here we go. I might not read every single one of these, but the list is long and distinguished. We've got Vox, Slate, the Boston Herald, the Boston Globe, Huffington Post, the Atlantic, Fox News, the New York Times, NPR, CNBC, Newsweek, Los Angeles Times, Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, the Guardian, the New Yorker, the Financial Times, Foreign Policy, the Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Magazine, Yahoo Finance, National Journal, Washington Post, Forbes, Bloomberg, Minneapolis Star Tribune, U.S. News and World Report, the San Francisco Chronicle, Philadelphia Inquirer, Harvard Business Review, The Hill, which kind of breaks my heart. I kind of like The Hill, Chicago Magazine, and of course, MSNBC. Now, these are just part. I think I'm sure that there are more than this. It also has a list of journalists of outlets whose journalists have also met with officials and had, state dinners that were sponsored by the China United States Exchange Foundation, which is really the CCP. And in these filings, FARA filings, they were described as private dinners. And the list on this is pretty much the exact same thing that I just read, except you also have the Associated Press, Time Magazine, PBS, The Economist, let's see, Politico, BBC, Business Week, Reuters, and of course, CNN. And again, on that list, I didn't even read them all. So pretty much every major media outlet has had their employees go on these trips that are paid for by the Chinese regime. Yeah, Gregory, you heard me right. I said Fox News. Yes, definitely. But it gets even worse. I could probably do a whole show on this. These reporters, and here's what they call them. They call them familiarization trips. That's what the China United States Exchange Foundation calls these trips, familiarization trips. And again, the criteria, according to this article, for participants included, and this is actually, let me just back up. This is actually in government filings. There's actually a government report. I'll put a link to that too, because I haven't read it yet, but I want to dive into it. I read some of it because I had to do it for an article. But the criteria for participants included, quote, effectiveness and opportunities for favorable coverage. That was the criteria that was outlined by the organization here. So this is a quid pro quo situation, right? A CCP affiliated organization will entice journalists with free trips, dinners, drinks, and a slew of other amenities. In exchange, these journalists will write glowy, gushy pieces about how wonderfully China is doing under the rulership of its communist government. But like I said, it gets worse. I can't remember if I've talked to this article. I wrote this article last year. mid to late last year. No, in November. This is not the only way that China is getting American establishment media outlets to collude with them to peddle communist propaganda. In November, I wrote about how the CCP was paying American media outlets almost $2 million for advertising and printing expenses. Now, how are they doing this? They're paying these outlets to spread propaganda pieces written or created and disseminated by a publication called China Daily. China Daily is a CCP-run organization whose objective is to push Chinese propaganda internationally. And this organization, again, which is under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party, they threw millions of dollars at outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy Magazine, the Washington Post, and pretty much most of the other outlets that I listed that were having journalists go on these familiarization trips. So in exchange for all that money, these outlets would publish articles written by the China Daily. Now, a majority of these articles were complimentary towards the Chinese Communist Party. In one instance, they published this headline, quote, Apple CEO, China getting outbreak under control. There were a bunch of other ones that were complimentary towards the Chinese government. Some of them were hit pieces on individuals or organizations or other types of entities who were criticizing the Chinese regime. So essentially, the China Daily threw up millions of dollars at these outlets. In exchange, the outlets allowed China Daily to use their platforms to spread pro-Chinese Communist Party propaganda on mainstream media outlets. So here's my thing, and this is what I'm going to look further into. These are just two ways that China is trying to influence the American public by allying with these major news outlets. Now, I will say, to be fair, I will say that the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, and a bunch of the others, once this was revealed, they terminated their relationship with China Daily. But they only did it after it was revealed and they got criticized for it. What that tells me is when people aren't paying attention again, they'll start working with them again. Because why not? If they're not going to be held accountable, why wouldn't they? But also, if they're doing these things, what else are they doing to influence the American public? That's what I want to know. And the fact that American news outlets would be so willing to hop in bed with the communist regime. I mean, these are capitalists, right? And they're jumping into bed with a communist regime that is against everything that they stand for. It's disturbing. It's not too surprising. I mean, they were getting paid. That's what they wanted. They were after the money. But it's still alarming and it's a bit depressing. I mean, they will go hard at Trump or at Republicans or what have you. They'll go hard at Russia, but they'll jump right into bed with China to help them disseminate their propaganda. So I want to know your thoughts in the chat. What do you guys think? Let's see. Yeah, don't forget that China hacked the background investigation files for pretty much everyone who had a DoD security clearance over a couple of decades. Yeah, I do remember that. And actually, there's another issue that I want to talk about too at some point about how they're getting all of our private information. I read an article that basically said that they have like 80% of the population's information. I don't know what kind of information they have on everyone worth looking into. Let's see. Megan Cox, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate you. Thank you. What else we got? Oh, sorry, I can't scroll here. The Soviets did the same thing back in the day. Yeah, let's see. President Trump had an EO, executive order, to expose this. I didn't know that. Not surprised. I mean, Trump was very hawkish against China. Biden trashed it, I believe. That wouldn't surprise me either. China Biden, he's kind of friendly with China, it seems like. Like, it doesn't seem like he wants to do much to upset them. China bots all over social media too. Yes, they do. Them and the Russians. Also, Iran does that too. Definitely. Celebrities are another way. Yeah, we saw what happened with John Cena, which was really disappointing. But I'm sure that they're influencing other celebrities as well. All right. You guys are talking about wine. Shiraz is a good variety. Yes, I love Shiraz, actually. That's one of my favorites. It's probably my favorite, the favorite. I don't do white wine. I like red wine. White wine, it's just not, it's too sweet. I don't like it. But yeah, Shiraz is great. You make me want to have some. Maybe I will this weekend. Why not? So I'm going to move on to the next thing. There will be more on this, by the way, because I'm very intrigued. I want to know more about what's going on here. Now, before I move on, though, just want to remind you to head on over to libertynation.com, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective. Now, when you go to libertynation.com, I say this all the time, you're not going to get a lot of the spin. You're not going to get a lot of the BS. You're not going to get the outrage porn. You're going to get a lot of analysis and a lot of nuance. So this stuff will tickle your brain, essentially, not just get you mad, it's not just the latest, oh, I can't believe what this leftist said or did. It goes deeper than that. We might talk about what people on the left say, but we're not just going to leave it there. We always go below the surface. So you got to check that out. They also have a member zone that you can subscribe to for premium content. You can get the daily briefing in your email. And it's definitely a good source for you to get some decent analysis that'll make you think whether you agree with everything or not. So make sure that you check out new and original material on libertynation.com, conservative news, where truth matters. Now, let's talk about Biden's migrant crisis. I actually have something a little bit positive to report here. And it's kind of I don't know. I mean, it's like one of those things where I'm glad he's doing it, but then it's like, why the hell wasn't he doing this before? So it seems that Uncle Joe has realized, or his team has realized, that they can't keep running away from the migrant crisis anymore. And what's funny about this, well, not funny, but it's ironic that the White House is taking a more Trumpian approach to the matter, if I can say that. they're kind of doing some stuff that his predecessor would have done. And it's interesting because White House press secretary Jen Psaki, she talked about this I believe it was last Friday. But here's the thing. They are putting forth some solutions. My thing is, as far as political damage goes, is it too little, too late? So she didn't talk about this on Friday. It was on Tuesday. But what she announced actually started on Friday. So on Tuesday, the White House announced that it has begun expelling migrants into Mexico to stop repeated attempts to cross the border illegally. Now, I've been following this and I've been keeping up with the reports. Every month, they release a report that tells you how many encounters Customs and Border Protection is having with migrants trying to enter the country illegally. So these encounters can involve them catching them at the border or catching them after they already get in, or anytime they encounter somebody, then that's recorded. So there have been like hundreds and thousands of encounters that they've been having. And in July, it looks like July is going to be even worse than June and May. It's probably one of the highest number of encounters that we've had to date. But a lot of these people, a big chunk of them, I want to say like 30% or so. I can't remember what I had written before. I think it was about 30%, are people who have already crossed into the country, gotten caught, kicked out, and now they're coming back again. And it sounds like the issue is that when we're deporting them, we're just bringing them into Mexico, but it's not that far from the border where they're being deported to. And they're catching, and these are mostly families, and you've also got some individuals too. But even Alejandro Mayorkas was admitting that July was a really bad month. And here's the thing. We're in the middle of the summer, and they're trying to cross through Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. If you live in those states, you know how hot it gets. And usually we see a decline around this time of the year. It's not normal to see a spike happening during this time of the year because it's just too hot. And if you're making that journey, you could die. A lot of them do die. by trying to cross when it's that hot. So to me, if they're willing to do that in this weather, in this sweltering heat, how much worse is it going to be when things start to cool down? Because that's coming up pretty soon. So what they're doing is they're moving families who are caught entering the U.S. illegally further into the interior of Mexico. So they have to start from further away, which might discourage some of them from coming up. It's not a perfect solution, but I could see that cutting down on it at least a little bit. And again, the objective seems to be to move them as far from our border as we possibly can to cut down on these repeated attempts. It's not going to do anything about first-time attempts, but after we catch them, it may make it less likely that they'll try again. Again, I don't know how well this is going to work. It's going to do something. I'm not sure that it's going to do enough. And then imagine all the people that we don't catch. Imagine all the people that are going through the asylum process, but we're just dropping them off without court dates and not telling them when to appear. We're doing catch and release again, and we've been doing it since Biden took office. He reversed most of what Trump's policies were on this, that were actually cutting down on illegal immigration. It doesn't mean that people weren't still trying under Trump, but his policies were discouraging many of them from coming. So here's what Psaki says. She also said, quote, "We've also started initiating, as of last week, expulsion flights into Mexico. The Department of Homeland Security started transferring certain families expelled under Title 42 by plane into the interior of Mexico. This is in order to attempt to cut down on recidivism and further spread of the Delta variant." Now, they're also implementing something called expedited removal. And this, Psaki said, quote, "This allows an immigration official, generally a CBP official, to determine if a migrant is protection or has an intent of applying for asylum." They're also using a method called lateral flights. Now, lateral flights refers to transporting migrants from one area of the border to another. And the idea is that you transfer them to a facility that is more capable of processing these claims more quickly, so that the ones who don't get to make it in, they get expelled quicker. So this is good, but it's late. It's very late. I think it might even be too late. If they were doing this up front, it may have discouraged other migrants from coming up to the border. Again, it wouldn't fix the problem completely, because we're always going to have people trying to get into the country illegally, because everybody wants to come here. However, it doesn't mean that you can't decrease the number. And here's the thing, like, Biden wasn't interested in doing much about this at all. Like, everything he talked about was window dressing. I mean, when the administration wasn't lying about it, they were basically avoiding the problem. I mean, he put Vice President Kamala Harris in as the border czar, and everybody knew that was a yes move. She's not going to do anything about it. I mean, her whole job was to address the root causes. Yeah, okay. She wouldn't even go to the border until like 3 or 4 months after she was appointed. So it was pretty obvious from the get-go that the White House wasn't actually serious about doing anything about this. But why are they doing this now? I mean, they could have done this earlier and then come out looking like heroes. Especially if they didn't reverse all the policies that Trump had in place. I didn't even agree with all of his policies, but they were better than what we're doing right now. And they were better than what we were doing before he took office, before Trump took office. It was so bad that even members of the activist media were criticizing the Biden administration. Now, there might be a few reasons why the White House waited until now to start actually trying to fix the problem, or at least pretending to, because this could all be fake as well. Now, Biden had been taking heat. He was already taking heat from the far left open borders crowd. We're talking about the Rashida Tlaibs and the Ocasio-Cortezes. He's been getting bashed by the progressives for a long time. I really don't know why he winks at them so much, why he kind of kowtows to them when he knows that that's not his base. I get to a certain extent he needs them in Congress. In certain cases, he'll need their votes, especially with this infrastructure bill that they're talking about. But in general, he doesn't need to acquiesce to them all the time, but he does. And I don't think that Biden is on board with a socialist. I do not believe that Biden is a socialist, at least not in the same way that AOC is and the rest of the gang, Bernie Sanders. So he was already getting flack for reopening some of the facilities that were being used under Trump with the whole kids in cages fiasco, that where the Democrats pretended to care about kids in cages, but then they really didn't, because when Biden started reopening these things, it's only the far left who actually took him to task for it. And even then, it was a milquetoast criticism. But I think that might have been a factor as to why he hasn't done much, because he doesn't want to piss these people off. Again, I don't know why, but I do think that that may have been motivating some of this. Now, I think that even though he feared that there would be a backlash, it's also worth speculating that they could have miscalculated when it came to public attitudes about the crisis. Maybe they believed that the American public wouldn't think that this was that big of a deal, especially since we've been going through it over the past few years. It hasn't been nearly as bad as it is now, but maybe Biden even tried to use this excuse. And Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, also tried to use this argument a few days ago, saying that, oh, well, we have migrants coming to the border every year. We always have caravans coming up. What they're leaving out is the fact that the numbers are far less in past years than it is right now. So this is a unique situation brought on by President Joe Biden. I don't care what he says. It is his fault. It's not Trump's fault. It's his fault. Now, it's not difficult to imagine that these people weren't taking immigration seriously because they didn't think that it would harm him politically. But now it seems that they have woken up, because it is hurting them politically. And I think they know it at this point. I mean, they had the evidence before. I mean, there was a Associated Press poll that came out in April saying that 56% of Americans disapproved of how Biden was handling the border crisis. Even in June, a Harvard-Harris poll showed that 63% of Americans, one, believe that illegal immigration has increased under Biden. Two, 61% believe that the surge of unaccompanied minors was the president's fault. And this another study, or actually the same study, found that 80% of Americans consider illegal immigration to be either somewhat serious or very serious. And last but most certainly not least, an ABC Ipsos found that 83% of Republicans, 65% of independents, and 37% of Democrats do not approve with the way that Biden is handling the border crisis. Now, I get that most Democrats are going to be on board with it, but I mean, the fact that over a third of Democrats think that he's doing a bad job says something. So they're learning of the lesson that open borders is not a popular policy. Nobody wants that. Again, the far left progressive crowd is way out of touch with the American people. But since Biden let this go, we have a situation where Customs and Border Protection is overwhelmed. They're having trouble processing asylum claims in a timely manner. Some of that has gotten a little bit better, but it's still an issue. They're having trouble taking care of unaccompanied minors. They're really having a lot of trouble preventing more illegals from sneaking into the country, because they're stretched thin, thanks in part to Biden ending the Remain in Mexico policy. And it's still a mess. But at this point, it seems that the Democrats have realized that this is not going to help them in the 2022 midterms. Guys, I think it's too late. Even if they turn things around right now, it's still going to take a while. This is going to go into 2022. And you better believe that Republicans will be campaigning on it. And it's not just the president who they're criticizing on this. They're Democrats. Democrats aren't holding him accountable. They're not trying to look for legislation to fix this issue. They're doing nothing. And at this point, it comes off like they're doing it on purpose, which I'm sure you know the reasons why. They want to get an electoral advantage. So this is not going to play out well. This is going to be one of several nails in the coffin of the Democratic Party come 2022. So what y'all got to say about it? Yeah, they are importing COVID. Yeah. See, they're trying to turn it. They since because that whole Delta variant, they have a rule where they just turn people away. The problem is that they're sneaking across the border, and CBP is too busy to handle that. We're going to get a lot of people in here with some Delta variant, right? And then also the Lambda variant, right? I haven't even looked into that very deeply, but still, Biden administration messed up. Let's see. Okay, now this is a scary thought, but might be true. It will take of terrorism at the hands of a border crosser for the U.S. to take immigration reform seriously. You know what's interesting about that? I just got done writing a piece. The Department of Homeland Security has issued a warning about potential terrorist attacks carried out by Al Qaeda, which is kind of on a comeback right now. They were decimated, but they're trying to find ways to come back. And there is chatter from what they've been monitoring, indicating that there could be some terrorist attacks coming up, as we get closer to the anniversary of 9/11. Now, it could end up being nothing. And one thing that I did realize when I was doing research on it, Al Qaeda has not carried out a successful terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. It doesn't mean they haven't tried. They've been trying. They've just been unsuccessful because we're monitoring the crap out of them. But what we do know that one way that these terrorists want to get in here is through our southern border. Hezbollah, Al Qaeda, ISIS, they've all tried it. Now, I don't think they've been successful at it, at least not that I know of, because there could have been some who snuck in and they're just waiting for an opportune moment. And I'm not trying to, use fear or anything like that. I'm just telling you what DHS is saying. And this is significant because DHS, FBI, they've been focusing on the threat of domestic terrorism from white nationalists or white supremacist groups, which, by the way, I'm not against that. I mean, I know a lot of Republicans are like, oh, those don't exist. Yeah, they exist. I mean, I don't think that they're just making this up to propagandize. I mean, it's not like they haven't pulled off terrorist attacks in the country before, but this might get a renewed focus on radical Islamic terrorism. So just throwing that out there in response to what you said, it's an interesting possibility. Jeff, you were assuming that he is fully mentally competent. Hey, he's got people around him, right? It ain't just Biden. As a matter of fact, I don't think he's doing very much at all. I think it's his team. So when I say Biden, I'm really talking about the folks around him that are realizing that this is an issue now. Because I don't think his team is very competent either, from what I'm saying. They're making some mistakes. Let's see. They can't demand mandates with the border being invaded. Well, they're going to do it anyway, right? So the last thing I want to talk about is this story, and I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of it. A story coming out of Atlanta, where there was an Atlanta school and an Atlanta mother who sued her child's school district because the school that her child was going to was straight up practicing segregation. And I don't mean like segregation light. I don't mean like those stories that you hear about teachers being forced to be separated by skin color because during a training session. I mean, they had black classrooms and white classrooms. Now, I'm going to quote from an article written by Kira Davis on redstate.com about this. I wrote one on it too, but it was more, I'll kind of get in, do a light touch on some of the stuff that I wrote. But she writes, quote, Democrats are always telling the American people that Republicans are only ever dreaming of ways to roll back civil rights and reinstate Jim Crow. From voter ID requirements to tax cuts, there is no issue that the Democrats won't use to terrify their loyal voters into believing Republicans will be bringing back Jim Crow segregation the moment they have the power to do so. So we already know that they always use those arguments. But then she writes, quote, in a stunning story out of Atlanta, a local mother was shocked to discover that her daughter's elementary school was segregating their classrooms by race. Kyla Posey told an Atlanta TV station that she discovered last year that Maryland Elementary School had been separating students into white and black classrooms. She was even more stunned after she called Principal Sharon Briscoe, who admitted the policy was in place and she herself had endorsed it. So Kyla Posey, the mother in question here, she said, Quote, first, it was just disbelief that I was having this conversation in 2020 with a person that looks just like me, a Black woman. It's segregating classrooms. You cannot segregate classrooms. You can't do it. She's right. It is very against the law. It is very against the law to segregate classrooms. She said that she had found out that the school was segregating classrooms when she had called in because she wanted her to have her daughter placed in a different classroom with a teacher that she thought would be a better fit. The problem is that she wanted to put her daughter into the white classroom. This is how she found out, by the way. When she made this request, the principal said that they couldn't do it. And here's what she said. Here's what Kyla Posey says, quote, she said, that's not one of the Black classes. And I immediately said, quote, what does that mean? I was confused. I asked for more clarification. I was like, we have those in the school? And she proceeded to say, yes, I have decided that I'm going to place all of the Black students in 2 classes. This would be funny if it wasn't so sad. Like, this is something that I would write as satire. This is how far out there this is. Now, I mean, the story goes on and you can read it if you want. But here's my thing with this. And I get that this is out of the ordinary. This is not widespread. This is not happening all across the country. I wouldn't be surprised if there were more schools that were doing this, but this is not the majority. But here's the thing. You've got this story happening. And by the way, the mainstream media has not said a word about it. There was only one publication at the time that it happened called the Atlanta Black Star. And by the way, this happened last year. This isn't recent. The reason why it got back into at least somewhat back into the conversation is because Posey filed a lawsuit against the school for doing this. Because again, they are breaking the law. And here's the thing. And this is something that Kira has said on her podcast too. I am pretty sure that the principal had good intentions. I think that she actually believed that this would help Black children and white children. And this is just me speculating right here, but I suspect that she did this based on a few studies that have come out. I think like 2 or 3. Well, there's probably more than that, but she's probably basing this on studies that do demonstrate that Black students tend to do better when they're being taught by Black teachers. And I haven't delved into the reasons why that is. I mean, some of them might be kind of obvious, but maybe she was, at least in part, basing her decision based on those studies. However, segregation ain't it, Chief. I mean, at least not government mandated segregation. Like if people want to segregate on their own, I actually don't care whether they're white, Black, or otherwise. As long as the government isn't mandating it, I don't care what people do. I mean, they have the freedom to do that. But this on top of the fact that, again, there are exercises that have been popped up and lawsuits filed. I mean, I wrote about 3 of these cases in which students were being separated by skin color as part of an exercise. Not permanently, but as part of an exercise. Teachers have been subject to the same thing. And of course, you know that these are not conservatives pushing this stuff. You know it's not. It's Democrats. It's people on the hard left. And when I first saw this story, I was like, so wait a minute. When it comes to voting laws, they're calling that Jim Crow 2.0. And these hard left-wing influencers are actually convincing people that voting rights are in danger, that they're being targeted by Republicans. And you know, it reminded me of that quote from Joseph Goebbels, although he didn't say it exactly in these words, but he did say something that expressed a sentiment. But it basically goes like this: always accuse your enemy of that which you are doing. I've also seen it said, always accuse your opponent of that which you are guilty. It's the left that is pushing for Jim Crow-like policies, I would say. I don't like using Jim Crow references like that, but this is closer to that than anything that Republicans are doing. They have yet to prove that any of these laws would disproportionately disenfranchise Black voters. Just like they couldn't ever provide evidence that requiring ID to vote disproportionately impacted Black people. It's the reason why most Black people believe that voter ID should be a requirement. But they are so quick to use Black trauma, namely the Jim Crow era, where our ancestors went through hell just to get equal status, and they're willing to exploit that to push their agenda because they want to pass this For the People Act, which is somehow designed to curb Jim Crow 2.0. I mean, on earlier this week on Tuesday's live stream, I played you guys a video about a lady who was talking about she was demonstrating at an airport in DC, and she actually believes that she's part of a movement that is akin to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. That's how they've got these people fooled. I don't think most people are falling for it, but enough are for it to be disturbing. So for them to say that, this is all Jim Crow 2.0, meanwhile, this stuff is happening in their backyard in a lot of cases with their approval, it shows the strategy. And that's why they were so mad when this stuff about critical race theory in the classrooms and the exercises that came from it, that's why they're so mad that this stuff has been exposed. It's why their response to it, their defense was all over the place. They said that it wasn't happening. Then they defended it, and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because half of them, again, they don't know what CRT is either. And I won't get too deep in it. I already talked about it a bunch, and I'll be talking about it more later. But that's that they use Black trauma. It's not just to promote a narrative about the right. It's also to distract from what they are doing. So if you see a massive campaign to accuse Republicans or conservatives of doing something that is racist, then you need to be looking for what they're doing, because chances are they are trying to distract from it. You know what I'm saying? Let's see what you guys got to say. So are you saying George Wallace was ahead of his time? Yeah, probably. Yeah, they project everything. Yep. And that's not to say that Republicans never do anything stupid. I mean, I didn't forget what they did in North Carolina when it came to that voter suppression. That was an actual legitimate case of voter suppression carried out by Republicans. That doesn't mean that all Republicans would have done that, but still, I can admit when they do something wrong. However, that doesn't mean that every time the left accuses them of voter suppression that they're actually telling the truth. 9 times out of 10, they're lying to you. Yeah, voter ID is voter suppression. Yeah, because we're too dumb to figure out how to get an ID. Let's see. It will suppress voters that tend to be elderly and who live in nursing homes, living facilities. This is the closest thing to a valid argument that I've ever heard about voter ID laws. However, the data doesn't bear that out. The data shows that they're still able to cast votes. Even before, when they were enacting voter ID laws, they were still able to get out there and vote. Black turnout has been going up. So if there was actual voter suppression, that wouldn't be happening. So, and by the way, I'm not necessarily saying that voter ID is the best way to curb, voter fraud, because I'm not convinced that voter fraud happens on a widespread scale. It does happen. It does happen. But I'm not convinced that it happens on a huge scale. However, I still support voter ID because I think that if we eliminate it across the board, like the Democrats want to do, it could lead to more voter fraud. I don't know how much more. It could be a little bit more, could be a lot more, but still, I think it makes sense to require some form of identification. And what the state of Georgia did, they made it free. So they removed a lot of obstacles to getting ID. So we're talking about a very small percentage who might have some trouble getting ID. Let's see. I.e. people who do not need ID. Yep. Yeah, and I get it. Not everybody needs an ID, I suppose, but the percentage of people who genuinely don't need it, it's minuscule. And here's the thing, if they actually want to vote, they can get an ID. There are ways to do it. And in some states, if you don't show an ID, they have other things that you can show to identify yourself. So it's a horrible argument. And some of these laws, I have problems with some of them. I think that they may have a chance of decreasing voting across the board, but I don't think that it's going to decrease voting disproportionately for Black people. And even the ones that I think might discourage voting, again, very small part of the population. And I do think that some of the measures are stupid. Like they didn't need to be put in place, or they didn't need to remove other measures that were designed to make it easier. I think it's goofy. So I'm not saying that that these voter laws are perfect, but it ain't Jim Crow 2.0 by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, I didn't say voter ID was racist. It will suppress voter turnout. Yeah, no, I was talking about people who do make that argument. I didn't see that you were making that argument, but there are people who make it. And then that's the right question. The question is how many people? If we're talking about 5 people, I'm sorry, like it's not a big deal. And realistically, figure out ways to get them ID. I mean, it can't be that hard. And at a certain point, you either want to vote or you don't. My mom does not have a valid ID card. Well, go get her one. What? I'd be curious to know which state you're in. And neither does my grandma. Now, the other question I would have is, do they vote or do they want to vote? Because some people might not just, that most people don't vote. So I'm going to sign off in a second, though. So maybe you can get that to me some other way. But I would be curious to know which state you're in and whether your mother and grandmother actually want to vote, or at least know why they don't have IDs. Because you did say that not everybody needs them. So that I'd be interested in that. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. And until next time, keep your minds free.